next question is, which is a common question that I get on my website quite a bit, is why is it so hard to change? You know, we start off with good intentions, and then I fall back into the same person. I don't believe in myself. Is this really possible? Well, let's talk about that, because we have to begin to understand that there's a certain physiology that takes place between the brain and the body. I mean, every time we have a thought, we make a chemical. If we have great thoughts or unlimited thoughts, we make chemicals that signal the body for us to begin to feel exactly the way we were just thinking, which would be great or unlimited. So this etherical thing called thought is running around in the brain, fires a set of circuits. The circuits then release chemicals, and the chemicals travel to the body as messengers to signal the body for us to feel exactly the way we were thinking. So if you were thinking unhappy thoughts or negative thoughts, in a matter of seconds you would begin to feel unhappy or negative. So now the body then gets the signal from the brain, and we begin to have mind and body working together. We begin to have our thoughts stimulating our body, and we begin to think negatively, we begin to feel negatively. Now once we begin to feel negative, and we're noticing that we're feeling that way, it's very appropriate for us to think equal to how we feel, which then makes more chemicals for us to feel the way we think and think the way we feel. And this chemical cycle, this chemical continuity, creates what's called a state of being. So a person says, I'm an unhappy person, because they've memorized that chemical state of being. Now if you think about this, the repetitive cycle, the redundancy of making those same chemicals, 20 years of hatred, 10 years of anger, 15 years of judgment, the chemicals that are being created are conditioning the body over time to become the mind. So think about this. When the body becomes the mind, we're in a habit. A habit is when the body is the mind. So the person has fired the same thoughts which made the same chemicals of, say, suffering or insecurity. They think insecure thoughts or they think a suffering thought. It then signals the body for them to begin to feel insecure or to suffer. Once they begin to say suffer, then they begin to think equal to how they're feeling. They begin to think thoughts of self-pity. They begin to complain. They begin to blame. They begin to make excuses, which then makes them feel more suffering, which then allows them to continue this cycle. And when we begin to think and feel and think, and think and feel over and over again, feelings become the means of thinking. And when we can't think greater than how we feel, we'll never change. To change actually is to think greater than how we feel. So let's just think about this now. A person has memorized a certain state. We'll say suffering because we're using that as an example. They've practiced it enough times, they've thought about it enough times, they felt it enough times, it's become their personality, an aspect of their personality. And by repeating the thoughts over and over again and repeating the feelings, I said, if we do that enough times, we condition the body to become the mind. Here's an example. So you say, well, how does the body become the mind? Well, if you're feeling in the state of mind called suffering, and you've mastered that feeling, the body knows better than the brain. And when we can repeat something that amount of times, we file it into a different memory system in which the body literally knows better than the brain. You know, if you think about it, when you can't remember a phone number in your mind, but you pick up the receiver on your phone and your hands is able to dial the number. I mean, how is that possible? It means that you've practiced that so many times that the body knows better than the brain. So most emotional reactions, most states of mind, most skills and most habits, most conditionings take place where the body knows better than the brain. So the person then who has suffered for, say, 20 years, they say, I want to consciously declare that I want to be happy. But because the body has been conditioned for 20 years to be unhappy or to suffer, the mind and the body are not working together. So the body is the servant to the master. The brain and the mind is the master. If we condition the body to know better than the brain, the servant literally becomes the master, and then the master goes to sleep. So now when we say we want to consciously, willfully declare happiness, the body which has been conditioned to be unhappy, mind and body are working in opposition. So if the body knows the state of mind of unhappiness better than the conscious brain knows happiness, because it hasn't really had the experience, then the body just takes one stray thought or one stimuli from the environment and the next stimulus from the environment. And the next thing you know, the person begins to act in repeatable ways. So to change then is to lift the mind out of the body and to put it back in the brain. And that takes an act of will. That takes effort. Nobody tells us that change is going to be difficult. Nobody says, hey, in the midst of change, you're going to be uncomfortable. Well, it's true, because when you begin to break the same chemistry, you interrupt the chemical continuity of thinking and feeling. If you say, today I'm no longer going to suffer, today I'm no longer going to feel sorry for myself, today I'm no longer going to be making excuses or blaming anybody, and you begin to stop the same thoughts and same actions, you're no longer making the same chemistry to the body, and the body begins to go in chaos. It begins to revolt because it's been conditioned for 10 or 20 years. And it begins to send signals back to the brain. And it sends signals both through the central nervous system and through the circulatory system. If we no longer think the same thoughts and make the same chemistry, the body now all of a sudden notices that it's no longer getting its habitual conditioning. The cells of the body get together and they begin to send a signal back up to the brain through the central nervous system. I call that the fast track. When the amount of chemistry is no longer being produced by the brain, a part of the brain called the hypothalamus turns on, and it's like the brain's thermostat. It notices that the chemistry for suffering is going down, and all of a sudden the thermostat begins to want to make more chemistry to bring everything back up to status quo again. I call that the slow track. So through the circulatory system and through the central nervous system, if the body has become the mind, it begins to send signals back to the brain, and those signals come in the form of what I call subvocalizations or chatter or voices that begin to tell us, you can start tomorrow. You're unworthy, this is a good reason to suffer, this doesn't feel right. And the moment we begin to respond to those voices, and we begin to accept those voices as true, we create the same chemistry that allows us to begin to act and think in predictable ways again. So most people don't change it because when they start to make their changes and they notice that they're going from mind being in one state and body being in another state. In other words, they've lived for the same way for 20 years being unhappy, and now they're going to try to willfully become happy, but the body has been conditioned to another agenda. In the process of change, there's got to be a way to begin to teach the body a new state or recondition it with a new mind. And that takes a certain amount of practice. So most people never change because first they know it's uncomfortable, and when they start to feel uncomfortable, even though the familiar may not serve them, in other words, they're happy being unhappy, as long as they continue to feel the same feelings or the feelings become interrupted, it's easier for them to go back to the familiar even if it doesn't serve them. So they've memorized the state and they move back to that same state of mind. What's the result of that? They make the same choices, they choose the same relationships, they have the same circumstances in their life, and they move back to that same chemical state again. So to change then, we have to understand that we have to begin to think and act in different ways, and we have to unlearn those old states and make ourselves aware of them, and then relearn a new state, and that takes a certain amount of practice. We'll talk about that in one of the other questions.
إذا أعجبك الفيديو لا تنسى دعمنا بإعجاب وتعليق، وليصلك كل ما هو جديد الرجاء الاشتراك معنا بالضغط على زر سبسكرايب.